Welcome. So here we have a quick overview of functionalism as a pure theory for the theory and method section of paper 1 and paper 3. So let's take a look at functionalism as a pure theory. So as always, we need to know that functionalism is macro, structural, consensus, and modern. And functionalism is all about how all the elements of society work together for the wider benefit of society as a whole. Merton is a key thinker here. We haven't touched him yet, but we're going to come to him in a minute. But a familiar one we've looked at is the organic analogy from Durkheim, looking at how all the systems work together like a living organism and they all support one another. So, functionalism in other topics we've covered. So we've seen functionalism in a few topics now, and just to quickly recap here. So in family, we saw that the family is an agency of primary socialization. We talked about the work of Durkheim, Parsons, and Wilmot and Young. And ultimately, their argument was the family performs positive functions for society as a whole. It socializes children into the norms, the values, the culture of wider society, helping to maintain social solidarity. Education, we saw the idea that education is an agency of secondary socialization, continuing the primary stock that's taken place in the family. Again, Durkheim and Parsons were key figures, this time joined with Davis and Moore. And in this instance, we were looking at the idea that education has positive functions for society, socializing us into norms and values, ultimately helping us to learn and perform a role in the workplace, in the economy. And then last but not least, we saw beliefs. Again, religion was part of secondary socialization. The key figures of Durkheim and Parsons reappear again. We'll see this time with Bella. The main argument here is religion is functional. It has a function for society. And this argument came in the idea of the functional prerequisite. But ultimately, the general pattern, as you can tell, is that each institution is functional for wider society, performing a particular role or job. Now, Durkheim is a pure theorist. Obviously, we can take what we already know about Durkheim from the other topics. But Durkheim also looked at the idea of social facts. And what social facts are is the idea that these are external forces that influence our behaviour. This arose during his study of suicide in sort of the 1900s. And what he identified was that these external forces, these social forces, influenced the types and the levels of suicide between different parts of the world. So it was all to do with social integration and moral regulation. So Durkheim essentially argued that the structural approach of society, that society influences human behaviour. And ultimately, he believed that in order for society to function, each section of society must be interrelated and working together. So that's more familiar ground with Durkheim there. He also argued that individuals need to share beliefs and practices. That ensures cohesion. If we don't have that consensus, we don't have that integration and unity, this can cause people to fall into the state of anomie, normlessness, which then can cause disruption to society. Parsons, everyone's favourite sociologist, very, very popular and obviously appears a lot. Parsons argued that if societies survive, obviously they need those four functional prerequisites. They need to meet the Gao model, or the different prerequisites of every society. So Parsons has had a lot to say. Now, one of the things about Parsons to keep in mind is he's what we call an armchair sociologist. Very little of his research is kind of empirical and it's more theory and ideas, which is why he can appear so frequently in the topic. So the first one was goal attainment, goals of society. Every society needs to have a shared goal. And you can think about what are the shared goals in our society. So wealth, success, family life, education. These are kind of some of the shared goals, the things we value as a society. There's adaptation, where every element of society needs to be able to adapt to changing resources, changing structures, changing environments. So think about how the family adapted during industrialization from a big extended to a small nuclear, and obviously fitting in with Parsons' theory of fit. Integration is a key one here as well. Again, the idea everyone needs to be socialized into the shared norms and values. Education, religion, family, socialization, key factors here. And latency. So the idea that we need to have systems to relieve stress and tension, to manage conflict. Think back to Parsons' role of the family, the stabilization of adult personalities, the soap and the warm bath, It's a good example of latency, the family performing latency. And then lastly, we have Merton, who we've not seen before. He's a new thinker here, but ultimately he comes down to two arguments. He says that the society has beneficial functions, positive functions for the individual, but he also argues that some systems don't work. There is a lot of dysfunction. So very critical of Parsons, and he's very optimistic, very positive approach. Now, what he argues is that every institution has its manifest function, its designed function, its purpose. Often these are positive for the benefit of society, but then there are also unintended latent functions, unintended effects which can have negative impacts. So examples would be stuff like, it's the news article here, Brexit, the idea that it's hard to figure out the positive elements of Brexit, but ultimately the idea was to give people choice and control, but the negative latent function has been the rise in racism as a result, particularly since the campaign finished. Or we could look at education. The manifest function of education is to socialise children and ensure they're productive and functional for society. The latent function, the unintended dysfunction, might be issues like bullying or underachievement or abuse. So they would be the unintended. So Merton's quite different because he does recognise that everything isn't perfect. There are possible problems. Okay, there we have it. So a quick recap of functionalism as pure theory and also where it relates to what we've done so far. Hopefully it helps cover this up, and thanks for watching.